To get started, great to see all of you. Thanks for inviting me to be with you for these sessions. So my name is Dale Soden. If you were here last week, a longtime member of St. Mark's and recently retired history professor from Whitworth. And while talking about history in any form and context, Tim Hansen just came up and said, "Now don't feel offended if those of in the choir have to leave early." And I said, "Tim, look, I've taught for over 40 years. I'm used to students working on their cell phones, falling asleep, and using any excuse they can to walk out and go to the bathroom during the course of so no, you can't faze me. Just keep plodding along. But again, thanks for being here. This is the second of 4 sessions. We take a break next week. I'm out of town, but the following week we're going to focus primarily on the ministry of Dick Finch. Dick will be here, and we'll have a conversation over the course of the hour. And then the last session, I will try to summarize and talk a little bit about what I think we've learned or talked about in terms of the history of St. Mark's and what does that mean going forward. So that's how we're. But today, I have 3 just great people to share some experiences that they've had over the Jack and
excuse us.
Yeah, no. I'm also not. You aren't late. I started a little bit early, so.
Thanks for letting us off.
But to share some experiences that they've had during their time at St. Mark's. I'll introduce it just briefly by reminding those of you who were here last week, and then maybe some of you who've just joined us this week, a little bit about what I said, and then I want to show a little bit of the video that we made 25 years ago on the occasion of the 50th anniversary, and then we'll take the last 25 minutes or so and have Katie and Elaine and Patty share their experiences. What I suggested last week, and if you were in the first service, Pastor Kate alluded to this, is that when I've gone back over and tried to look at things that are in our records and just thinking about the nature of St. Mark's, a couple of things stood out to me. And one is the importance of our beginnings as an Augustana church, the Swedish version, if you will, of Lutheranism. You probably all know Lutherans organize themselves largely around ethnic identities, Norwegians, Danes, Finns, Germans, and Swedes. And the Swedish version was probably the most inclusive of all of the versions. They were the most inclined to merger, to bring other Lutherans together. They were not a fundamentalist church. They were not a pious church. And as I think about just the nature of St. Mark's in terms of our welcoming spirit, our willingness to bring people together rather than to sort of exclude and to separate, that's been an important part of St. Mark's history. And I just briefly mentioned the number of pastors who had come out of the Rock Island Seminary, out of the Augustana tradition, and really sort of helped and bake in, and we use that term today, the nature of that inclusivity around what makes St. Mark's. And I suggested then there were 4 areas that we really focused on and I think have helped us survive. And I mentioned the fact that surviving the 75 years is no small accomplishment. I mentioned that I wrote a biography of a pastor who was in Seattle, who was the pastor of the largest Presbyterian church in the country, 10,000 members, and that church no longer exists. You can just drive around Spokane and see a number of church edifices that we know no longer exist, at least in the form that they may have other uses. But what has happened here over the 75 years is a significant accomplishment, and those of us who are here now do stand on the shoulders of people who came before us, and I think that's sometimes the value of studying history or thinking about our past. It humbles us and hopefully inspires us to keep on going. So I suggested that the four areas were the importance of worship, led by our pastors through the years, word and sacrament, but I spent some time talking about actually the building itself, which is in Spokane pretty unique as far as its attentiveness to detail, to, again, trying to create a space where we're more self-conscious of leaving one world and entering another for the hour and then going back into the spaces that we live the rest of the week. But this is a building, you know, that has paid attention to details that evoke images of the medieval church. Again, a kind of Northern European experience that is again different than what most churches in Spokane again have developed over the years, and I think that's supplementary, you know, to the preaching of the word and the administration of the sacraments, but still an important part of our era or our experience together. So the second, and which we're going to talk about more today, is education. The third would be the ways in which we develop community within St. Mark's and nurture our common life together. And then finally, our commitment to the broader world of social ministry and justice that really Pastor Edmund was talking about this morning. So those four areas are what I think have been important in the history of St. Mark's, and we'll want to focus on particularly the last three today: education, our own community, and community outreach with people who have lived and breathed that at their time at St. Mark's. But I'm gonna take just a few minutes. This was a video maybe some of you have seen, maybe all of you have seen, but that I was involved 25 years ago with Dave Tanner, who was the owner of North by Northwest Productions, and gives just a bit of a sense of what I talked about, but I think there's just some fun visual images here. So, Edwin, am I doing this right here?
Hit space bar.
Yeah, space.
Here you go.
Do I control the volume here? Or?
No, I gotcha.
Thanks. You see?
Maybe.
Positive.
Sure. It might get blared out.
I think the speakers are.
I'm not getting any volume anymore now.
A little.
Well, let me narrate it for you. There was Martin Luther. We skipped from the 16th century to 1946, 47. So, you know, this is our piece of.
Oh my.
I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago it would work just fine.
I mean, one of the things that I said, and this really was talking about here, is we started Masonic Temple across the street, and first thing that they did was to form a Sunday school and a Lutheran league.
Building on
There we
Grand
go.
There
Led by Pastor Henry Wilson, in the origins of St. Mark's Lutheran Church reach back to the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century, when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses on the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral. From Luther's dramatic stand to the thousands of immigrants that came from the old world to the new to express their religious beliefs, the founders of St. Mark's stand in a long tradition of Christians who built churches in which to worship God and raise their children. And many of the early St. Mark's members came from a Swedish background, rooted in reverence for music and careful attention to the sacraments. In 1945, World War II had come to an end, and Americans all over the country built churches in record numbers. At that time, the site at 24th and Grand was nothing more than an overgrown lot. Yet by the fall of 1945, as soldiers returned from the war, an idea for a new congregation on Spokane's South Hill began to take shape. In January 1946, 29 children and their families responded to the invitation by Lutheran leadership to attend a new Sunday school. By February, a group of 56 gathered in the Masonic Temple building on Grand Avenue for worship, led by Pastor Henry Hokanson. In August of 1946, Pastor and Mrs. Luther Livingston were called. Fresh from seminary and newly married, the Livingstons came to Spokane with great enthusiasm.
Luther and I were married in 1946, and this was his first call right out of the seminary. And I'd never been away from home before, and I cried every mile of the way. I think he wondered what he got into. I was 19 by a month, and he was 24. And I've got to say, I think this congregation finished raising me. They taught me to cook, they taught me to sew, they taught me to do open houses, how to set the tea table, the whole 9 yards.
Finally, on January 26, 1947, St. Mark's was officially formed as a part of the Augustana Synod of the Lutheran Church, and Pastor Livingston received 147 members that first day. From the beginning, St. Mark's was known for its music. The choir was organized under the direction of Mr. Orville Westberg and accompanied by Mrs. Byron Swanson. For the first few years, worship took place in the Masonic Temple. In those years, the temple was the site of many a Saturday night dance. And barely 8 hours after the dance, the essentials for worship were set up.
The whole thing was pretty temporary, but it involved especially the men to put the things up and take it down for the Masonic Temple every week.
Everything got folded and put away neatly, and we had church. You couldn't tell that we had church there.
But some of the best times in those first years were the picnics in Manitou Park.
I have a lot of memories of picnics at St. Mark's. And watching all the men play baseball, and we have relay races, we have balloon shows, and all of those.
By January 1949, church leadership announced plans to build an imposing new structure that reflected Swedish architectural elements on the southwest corner of Grand and 24th. Designed by E.W. Molander, the church could not be built before $30,000 was raised, and the entire building was estimated to cost $100,000. Groundbreaking on the first phase took place on July 23, 1950, and was a glorious day.
So we trapezed from the Masonic Temple to 24th and Grand, and I watched Mrs. Anderson, who was the oldest lady member, turn a shovel of dirt.
Through the winter, construction proceeded, and on April 22, 1951, the building was dedicated. At this time, it was only the west wing with fireside room and the back 1/3 of the nave. And while enthusiasm for the new structure continued, St. Mark's felt saddened when Luther Livingston felt called to resign at the end of August 1952 and assume a new position as Army chaplain. The call committee subsequently selected Reverend Willis F. Erickson of Roseburg to come to St. Mark's. He accepted the call and preached his first sermon on October 12, 1952. Later that year, Orville Westberg moved to Seattle, and he was replaced by Byron Swanson, who proceeded to direct the choir for the next 2 decades. One of the earliest events directed by Bud was the cantata 7 Last Words of Christ. In April 1954, the armorial bell tower was dedicated, but the main church sanctuary was yet to be completed. During the 1950s, St. Mark's women worked on a variety of projects that received local press coverage. Among them were the making of white feather Christmas trees, hand puppets, and other gift items for the annual food fair. It was in the middle 50s that St. Mark's pledged to retire the $29,000 debt and move toward completing the sanctuary. Soon the congregation approved preliminary plans for the new nave, chancel, and church school addition. On May 12, 1957, ground was broken for the new nave and chapel. The new section cost approximately $125,000 and was constructed in a modern Swedish Gothic design. The main entrance, which was part of the first unit, has symbols of the 12 disciples hand-carved into the heavy redwood doors. Dedication week began on Saturday morning with a 24-hour prayer vigil in which 72 individuals assumed responsibility for maintaining a continuous chain of devout prayer for the proper use of the new building and for a more effective outreach to the community. By September 1958, Willis Erickson felt called to the evangelism staff of the Augustana Lutheran Church and resigned at St. Mark's. By January 1959, it was announced that the Reverend Irvin Malm of Littleton, Colorado, had accepted the call. One of the highlights of his early ministry was a trip to the Holy Land in February 1960, as part of President Eisenhower's Cultural Exchange Program. St. Mark's members also caught some of the vision of President Kennedy's call to ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. 18-year-old George Engdahl volunteered to participate in an Icelandic work camp. George was quoted as saying, "I think efforts like this and President Kennedy's Peace Corps are on the right track for bringing worldwide peace." In 1963, the call committee announced that the Reverend Earl V. Sackerson had accepted the invitation to come to St. Mark's to replace Pastor Malm, who had moved to Minnesota. Christmas was always special at St. Mark's, and in the early 60s, a series of international Christmas fairs were presented on the 4 Sundays in Advent in 1963. German, Scandinavian, Oriental, and Hungarian cultural traditions were represented. The last set of displays was arranged by Mrs. Tibor Probosicki, who had escaped from Hungary in 1956 during the communist takeover. In addition to discovering ethnic heritages, St. Mark's received local attention when they developed a chancel drama, The Circle Beyond Fear. Presented at the Pacific Northwest Synod meeting in Yakima, the drama drew high praise. In 1964, a pipe organ was installed after the funds were primarily donated by Mr. and Mrs. Eric Johnson. Otto Schoenstein from San Francisco designed and installed the organ. The political and social turmoil of the 60s affected St. Mark's as women of the church sponsored a panel on race relations featuring a local Superior Court judge. And in 1966, St. Mark's was the site of a musical social evening honoring 80 men from the area's 3 Job Corps centers. In 1968, Pastor Sackerson resigned and was followed by the Reverend Arthur Osmundson, who received special attention in the local newspapers for his dialogue sermon. Musically, St. Mark's continued to be led by Byron Swanson. The performance that received the greatest attention was the rock opera Jesus Christ Superstar in April of 1971.
I'll never forget St. Mark's doing Jesus Christ Superstar and how phenomenal that was. It was a production that should have been mad. It was that good. And it was done completely by the choir and soloists. And we just packed the place. It was phenomenal.
We turned people away the first time. I think we did it twice. But it was a packed house in that smaller church. I think we did pretty well.
In late 1973, Pastor Ernie Peel succeeded Pastor Osmundson. Reverend Peel and his wife Zora were the parents of 7 children, of which 6 would come with them to Spokane. The impact of the refugees from Indochina was brought home to St. Mark's in 1976, when Somsai Siprasut and his family from Laos were sponsored by St. Mark's. Agnes Randall and Roald Halverson were instrumental in helping with the resettlement. By 1980, St. Mark's had opened a Christian preschool under the direction of Evelyn Nyholm, and soon she was directing the children's choir. Pastor Peel was followed in 1982 by Denny Rodin, who resigned himself in 1984 when Pastor Richard Finch came to St. Mark's. Installed October 6, 1984, Pastor Finch was aided by Pastor Carl Samuelson, who brought special qualities to the life of the congregation. This congregation has clearly emerged as a rising star within Lutheran circles in the Pacific Northwest. Yet virtually all agree that the challenges ahead are daunting. Perhaps most importantly, all St. Mark's members face the challenge of living the gospel.
And I would like for St. Mark's to really experience what it means to be a church, to really know what forgiveness and acceptance is, to take seriously our idea that we sin in thought, word, and deed. We are all sinners here. That grace will abound and people will understand the humanness of our fallen condition and will bring to that a new perspective of forgiveness and acceptance.
The task of being a Lutheran in an age when denominational identity seems less secure than ever before is an important reminder that the gospel needs to be clearly preached and the sacraments freely given. The spirit of hospitality and commitment seem alive and well at St. Mark's. And so, after 50 years, we celebrate the past and welcome the future with a spirit of humility that acknowledges our dependence on the grace of God.
Thanks, that was fun to be a part of that. Okay, we're going to shift now. If Katie wants to sit to the left, and Elaine in the center, and Patty on the right. And what I thought would be fun to do is to continue this exploration of St. Mark's past through the lens of education, again, nurturing our own community, and again, the ways in which we have tried to serve the broader community outside of Spokane, or in Spokane. So I just asked them to reflect a little bit of whatever they want to say about their experiences they've observed at St. Mark's. And I'm going to start with Katie, who's been so much involved with education.
Can't start with Patty.
Oh, starting with you. So, Katie?
Yes,
Thanks.
you bet. Oh, that's it.
That's it. That's it.
So I'm Katie Cadlick. I've really only been a member here at St. Mark's for 8 years now. We lived in Vancouver, Washington. Before that, we were in Minneapolis. So I've been a member of a few different Lutheran churches, and what drew us to St. Mark's really is, we have 3 children, and the youth program and the Sunday school that they had here was really important to my husband and I. And so that was, amongst other reasons, the people, and we just felt at home when we landed here. But the youth program was one of our priorities. And so we became members, and it was about a year after we were members and I was involved in Sunday school that I was asked to become the director of Sunday school after Jane started working more in the office. And so through my years, the last 7 years of being in Sunday school, it just became so apparent how important the youth program is and forming the faith in the children. And I love seeing St. Mark's, the multi-generations that come together, they worship together, sing together, take communion together, and they involve the children in that. And the children see people taking care of each other. It's a community, and they grow up in that. And I think that's so important that they are just such a big part of our community. And it makes them feel like they own something and that they're belong. Mm-hmm. They're a part of something that's bigger than them, and they learn how to be kind to each other, not just to each other, but to different generations. And they also have something to fall back on as they become adults. Jane and I, we have kids that are in high school and in college, and they still get together outside of, when they come home from college, they get together and have bonfires together. And they grew up doing Sunday school with each other. Just the other weekend, LC was playing football against Jeannie. And there were a group of my daughter's friends that all go to church here. And they were watching one of their friends who goes here play with the Cheney football team. And they were cheering him on, and some other kids turned around and looked at my daughter Jessica and Luke, and they're like, "You know him?" They're like, "Yeah, I go to church with him." And so it just brings them together and makes them feel like a part of something. So I think that's the importance of having such a strong children's program here at St. Mark's. It helps grow the church.
No, thanks for that. Can you talk just a bit about some of the challenges that you've faced? I mean, these are good things, and they've been good, but we all know that these things don't happen, easily, particularly in this day and age. And if you could just share, don't be afraid to say, okay, yeah, this is where we're struggling, or this is where
well, we all know COVID just, and it's not just in church that COVID affected. It affected schools. It affected different clubs and groups across the board. And so, before COVID, we have a really strong community of young families. And so before COVID, in Sunday school, we were having 20 plus some kids every weekend being a part of Sunday school. And then COVID hit, and Ann Benson and I really tried to keep it going by doing online Sunday school. And then once it opened up, we couldn't be in the Sunday school room, we were in the fellowship hall, and it just, trying to get the families to come back, and some people weren't comfortable coming in person yet, and some people really wanted to be in person, so we tried to just bring everybody back. And so that's the struggle of building the momentum back again in the youth program, especially also in high school, just getting those teenagers involved. And so I think we're getting there. We're bringing the acolytes back. Sunday school is back out into the parish house and the godly playrooms. I think the momentum is building, and hopefully it's going to continue to build. Yeah,
no, thanks. Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that just observing over the 30 some odd years that I've been here, the importance of youth gatherings for people, the importance of Luther Haven, again, confirmation being such an important part of the culture of education here at St. Mark's. But thanks for sharing this struggle, because I think that going forward, and we'll talk about this in the last session, that we probably just need to double down on the importance of education for our church at every level, adult level, preschool, and again, looking back over the history, it's clear that education has been front and center for St. Mark's, and probably for us to survive and thrive for many years in the future. It's going to have to be one of those key aspects of our life together. Thank you. Yeah. I've asked Elaine Ornis, who's been here many years. I won't say how many. You can say how many you've been here, Elaine, but just someone who has been integral to kind of the lifeblood of the congregation in so many ways, as far as just observing, participating, nurturing our life together. So I've asked her to just reflect for a few minutes on what she remembers and has observed about what's been important at St. Mark's. So thank you for doing this.
Well, I look around and I think I am the oldest one here.
No way.
And Lyle and I and our daughters joined St. Mark's in 1963.
Wow.
So I have seen a lot of history happen here at St. Mark's. I also had the privilege of working for Pastor Finch and the other pastors that came along the way for 20 years. So I have lots of stories. In fact, I could really write a book. Yes. And I have more than could go in 5 minutes talking. And I look at all the people, and Roger Chase and all of them who've been so supportive and so forth. And we are a unique congregation, that is for sure. But I feel that we have done so much outreach and concern for the community and all of the things. If you look at our benevolences that we do now, it's amazing what St. Mark's does. It's mind-boggling. But my concern, way back when I was working, was we are doing all of this, but you know, it's kind of like taking care of someone at home. You have to take care of that person in order to take care of the person that needs you. And so my passion was the congregation. And it really came to light when, in the 1990s, we had a family that belonged to St. Mark's, Mary and Jeff Eng. I don't know how many of you remember them, but Mary was diagnosed with cancer. They had 2 boys that were going to Ferris High School, No, the grade school.
Oh,
Wilson, excuse me. That was right by our house. And so I reached out to Mary and Jeff and connected others in the congregation with them. And Mary did pass away. And I thought, you know, there are so many that are in need. And I thought it would be a good idea to maybe start sending cards out to people who were ill in our congregation and so forth. And we started doing that, and I named it Mary Cares. And that's been going ever since then. It has changed some because we then gained a parish visitation person. And I did that for a while, and I thought, oh, the best one for that is Berna Eicher. You all remember Berna. And she would visit the people and give communion and so forth. And as she aged, we could no longer do it. We now have Donna Nelson. Then about in 2000, in the very early 2001 maybe, I was approached by some people here at St. Mark's to begin a cancer support group. And that was due to Wayne Gilman, who was a basketball coach, very well known, was a member of our church that belonged to Ferris, that worked at Ferris High School. And that is how our cancer support group began. And it can, sadly enough, but I'm glad it does, it continues today. And when I had to give it up to care for my husband, Judy Palrud graciously has taken it over. And I'm hoping that soon it will begin to be active again, because we did have to cease during COVID. We've had different groups, and I think that this is going to change over the years. We have the AA group now. We used to have the Ruth and Mary Martha circles, the XYZ for the elderly, but those have ceased. We used to have the progressive dinners. I don't know if any of you went to the progressive dinners. Oh, they were wonderful. Anyway, I am hoping that St. Mark's will continue caring for one another in all these various groups. And I think it has truly kept us very strong.
Thank you, Elaine. Yeah, thanks for all you've done. And I just think of even every Sunday, it's not every church that prays specifically for for people in the service itself. And I think that just continues to reinforce how much we value, again, not only prayer, but knowing people by, or naming people by name, and again, continuing this tradition of, and practice really of trying to love one another within the congregation itself. This doesn't necessarily have to be Elaine answering this, but I think of, and many of you have participated in these, but I think of the smorgasbord or, again, church picnics. But would anyone want to share any other examples of the ways in which we have built and nurtured community among ourselves over the years?
How about the small groups that are taking place?
Small groups around vocation right now, yeah, that'd be, yeah.
We used to have the bazaar, the
Yeah.
smorgasbord. We still have the Fat Tuesday.
Mhm.
We used to have Oktoberfest. We still have the movie nights. We used to feed at All Saints, St. Anne's, and the Shalom. We still do crosswalk. We still do the Lenten boxes that the money goes to the social ministry. We still do the Tree of Giving. I mean, it is mind-boggling when you really think of all that St. Mark's does. It really is. We're truly an outreach church. People know us.
Well, maybe that's a good transition to Patty. And I originally asked Patty and Dick. Dick had surgery this week, and yeah, so I appreciate Patty coming and sharing again more about her own observations and experiences with the outreach of St. Mark's into the community.
As everybody knows, Dick and I got married in 2001 on the west side, and he took a job to set up the city of Spokane Valley in 2003. So we moved here, and they hired him permanently, and we were back and forth on weekends while he was helping set up the city. So he tried different churches when I wasn't around, and but the minute we walked into St. Mark's, we knew we were in the right place, because we got married in September 8th of 2001, 3 days before 9/11, and so our honeymoon, because our bent is towards mission work, was to Mexico in November to work at with a group out of Portland, putting concrete floors in people's little shacks that live around the dump. And so we've continued that on. That has been our lifespan. But when we walked into Spokane, into St. Mark's, we knew we were in the right place. And one of the things that was going on at that time was, it's now called Family Promise. I can't remember what it was called at that time.
Interfaith hospitality.
But it was, pardon?
Interfaith hospitality.
Interfaith, that's right, interfaith hospitality, where different churches around Spokane would house people trying to get back on their feet for a week at a time. And St. Mark's would do this. It was every 6 weeks, I think, we took in groups. So we got involved in that, and right away, we just knew that's what we needed to do. But and we've also been involved in, just to name some of the things that Elaine mentioned too, but also St. Mark's does SPEAR, which is serving people with education, art, and recreation. So in that process, we serve, it's mostly in the East Central District, families that are struggling to meet ends meet. So we provide donations of food and clothing, and then of course there's Shalom, which they're now doing takeout boxes, I understand. And then, along with everything else, we've done Lutheran World Relief, the school kids, and we've supported Vanessa Behan, again, All Saints and St. Anne's, which I really miss working at All Saints and St. Anne's. That was kind of a meaningful thing. And Crosswalk, obviously, everyone is able to participate. About 5 years ago, I became the liaison between Second Harvest and St. Mark's. We're now supporting Franklin Elementary School, where we provide kids that are on the free lunch program, they get a bag of shelf-stable food every Friday that they get to take home. And sometimes that might be the only food they get for the weekend, but sometimes they have children, there are kids at home that are younger than them and that don't have access to the outside world, and so they can share in that kit of food. So St. Mark's has been wonderful in supporting, a church member can support a child at Franklin for the full year for $180. So you've all been very generous in that process. And then Dick and I went with the youth, which we love to travel, if anybody doesn't know that. We went to Port Arthur, Texas twice with the youth to help rebuild houses after hurricanes. And then we also got to go to Africa with Pastor Eric. He was interested in setting up something in conjunction with Africa schools. And so we were able to go over to East Africa and see this program. It used to be that teachers would write everything on the board, the kids would write it on their paper, there was no interaction with the students. They were just, and then they would get tested on what they wrote. And so needless to say, a lot of kids didn't pass. So they have set up this new program in Africa now where the teachers actually interact with the kids and help them learn what they're studying. So when we went with Pastor Eric, we got to recognize that. So our bent is, as everyone knows, we go to, well, up until pandemic, we would go overseas with Habitat for Humanity, and we've done probably 20 trips with them, and then probably another 7 or 8 with other organizations. So our bent is obviously to help wherever we can. So.
Thank you. Yeah. Would anyone else like to share any other aspect of outreach to the community that, yeah, Jan?
Well, I was just thinking how much difference one person can make, you know, and I've had Elaine and Verna and Dick Finch and others almost pushed me into somebody else that needed talking to. and I, you know, like, need a friend, you know, and off you go. And I remember one with Dick Finch, I was walking through the line and shook his hand, and I didn't get a chance to shake it before he had pushed me, and he said, "Soldier, lonesome, need to talk." So I went running to stop this guy before he left, and he was new to Spokane and a Catholic, but he attended St. Mark's after that. We're still friends. We visited him back in Washington, D.C. And my experience has been, I mean, I can think of one of each of them. Verna sent me to Salem because she thought I was lonely. I had just moved back to St. Mark's, and I met Jeff. So it's just,
I guess she was right.
Yeah. So the power of the individual here, I mean, there's just so many people I could name that have introduced me to someone or led me to something that I was so glad that it happened.
No.
And it's the kind of people here that I am just attracted to. You know, I was baptized here, but all the way along there's been people like that. Mildred Manning, good Lord. You know, yeah.
Years ago, Dick said, Pastor Finch said, if you don't know someone, when you're in church, if you don't recognize someone or you don't know their name, everyone needs to go and pick one person and talk to them after church, because we need to be known as not that church on the hill. We need to be known as the church that welcomes people back. And I've met so many neat people that keep coming back, and I've explained to them, you don't have to be a member here to participate. Your kids are welcome here. Kids make noise. kids chat during church, kids comment on what's going on in church, and they need to be felt that they're welcome, because if you welcome the kids, their parents will come back. And, you know, there are a lot of great people. You don't have to be Lutheran. I mean, we were meeting in Fellowship Hall when we had ice storm because there were no lights on in it.
Amen.
And we started talking about people's backgrounds. 30% of the people were Catholic or from another major denomination. It's fine. My husband's still not a member. Who cares? And Dick says, "Oh, he's a member." You know, he just doesn't have to go to classes. I mean, you know, we had 2 Jewish men that went here for over 20 years, and when they moved on, Pastor Finch wrote to them. One of them died. Pastor Finch went to the temple at his funeral, and all these other people at the temple recognized Pastor Finch. So, you know, we need to be the welcoming church where people are welcome to come back.
You know, Peggy, thanks for that. Yeah. Well, just 2 quick comments. First of all, thank you so much for sharing. You know, I can read through, and you can read through old reports and annual reports, and you can see about these things. But it's when people like yourselves speak to your own experiences with that, and it just makes it so much more inspiring. And I think you know, we can all benefit generally from what it is, and your comments have reinforced this. I think the other comment I would make is that, you know, you often think about the history of a church through the lens of pastors, and clearly that's important. But what the 3 of you represent and what you've just been expressing is how important the laity is within the congregation, and that's what really gives its lifeblood. And I think that's just such an important part of the history of St. Mark's. So thank you for, yeah.
I will never forget when Dolores Tomta and Dee Lorenz saw a whole bunch of us young moms in the 1970s, and we didn't really belong in a circle, so they started the circle for us, and formed many really good friendships.
Yeah.
And that was huge. There were about 15 of us that joined that circle,
That's
and
great.
it was amazing.
Yeah. Barb is anxious to.
Yes, because that wasn't exactly right, Dottie. That was Pastor Peel. Came to Evan Nyholm and me and said, we need a young women circle. So it was Evan, me, in my living room, started that circle. But there's one story. It lasted for quite a while, but one of the meetings, Ev said, well, I'm not going to be able to come anymore because I'm going to start a preschool at St. Mark's. And Karen Bioloser and someone else and me, we were all going to go back to school. And everyone there just burst into tears. Like, oh, women are going to go back to work now. Women aren't going to be home anymore during the day. And that was a very traumatic experience, so we moved Elizabeth Circle to the evening. But Dottie, Sharon Olson, I mean, to imagine, our children now are 50. we were the young mothers.
We were the young mothers group for so long and we did the layettes for Lutheran World Relief until we realized we don't have any connection to the babies. We need to do school kids for Lutheran World Relief. We have kids in school. And then we morphed into Eat, Pray, Laugh with continuing with Lutheran World Relief and doing what has to happen in the community.
No. Well, that's a good note to end on. Those things. So, thank you so much for being here. We'll see you in